Welcome back to another episode of the Crime Scene Insiders podcast. I'm your host, Angela Davies, and I'm here with my co-host, Dion Watson, and we're going to take you under the barrier tape.
As well as myself and Ange, today we are joined by a very special guest, Julie Wolfe, who is a medical legal death investigator based in the United States. So thank you very much, Julie, for joining us on our podcast today. Yeah, it's fantastic to have
Thank you very much for having me.
That's okay. We really appreciate you taking the time out because we know you're extremely busy. So we really appreciate you coming along to see us. So before we get into the throes of the podcast, we thought we would start with a little bit of a background into yourself and your career. So do you mind filling our listeners in with a bit of information of your career to date?
Sure. So I originally went to college to be a biology teacher, and that ended up being not the best choice for me. So I picked forensic science because it looked pretty interesting and I like to solve puzzles. And with that, when I went to school 100 years ago, they had a lot of, it was a lot of chemistry background. I went to school at the University of New Haven in New Haven, Connecticut. I got a dual degree in forensics and chemistry, and I had to do an internship for one degree and write like a thesis for the other. And I couldn't find anywhere to get an internship because they don't like to give internships to undergrads. So I ended up at Yale University in their autopsy and pathology department doing autopsies. But yeah, what they wanted us to do was like clean and type death certificates and do some administrative stuff. But I got bored and I got my hands into everything. And
Just like
never really saw a dead person before, except for like my great grandmother's funeral when I was a little kid. So to see things from, you have a sick person who went to a hospital and they pass away and no one knows why, and then to do the examination and then give an answer to the family, I was like, I kind of really want to do this. So I had a hard time finding a job after that, but I ended up being a secretary for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the state of Connecticut, and then worked my way into being an investigator. Unfortunately, I got laid off in 2011 due to the budget, so I ended up going all the way out to Snohomish County in Washington State, which is on the other side of the United States near Seattle. I worked there for 5 years, and then I had a couple things happen within my family, so I moved back to the East Coast. So I worked for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City for a year. And then
that was busy.
Oh, very busy. Yeah. Very busy.
Yeah, very busy.
And then I ended up coming down here to DC, and I've been here for 8 years now.
So you've worked right across the states then?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Are things very different in each state? Because things are quite different, aren't they? We know between the UK and America, which we'll talk a bit about in the podcast, but are they different across the states as well?
Yes, it's not only geographically different, it's different in economics and terrain and even the system as a whole. In the United States, depending on the state itself, the medical examiner systems are set up either as a medical examiner system where you have a forensic board certified forensic pathologist that leads the agency over some tier of government, and other like rural areas or even some of the bigger areas have coroner systems, which the coroner is elected by the government administration. So it can be a doctor. Sometimes in rural parts of the United States, it's like a person who has some kind of medical or legal background, like a lawyer or funeral director, because they don't really have a lot of deaths to deal with during the course of the year. So they kind of do it as a part-time job.
Yeah. I guess I think probably taking a step back, it'd be really great for our listeners if you can give us a bit of information about what a medical legal death investigator is and what you do.
Okay, yeah, we are basically we're the eyes and ears for the pathologist. The function of the office is to investigate any non-natural death, but that also expands into natural deaths because you start to get into gray areas of, well, what if someone's never seen a doctor and no one can sign off on a death certificate? Or what if no one has any family and there's nowhere for the body to go to a funeral home or mortician for final arrangements? There's a specific set of criteria for a death to be called into the office, and that kind of is pretty standard across the United States. It's mostly deaths within 24 hours of admission to a hospital, anything right post-surgery, or anything that happens outside of a controlled medical facility. Someone passes away at home, there's an accident, there's a homicide, someone's found, deceased out in the woods somewhere. So we get the call, and the investigators determine whether or not the case needs to be investigated. So say if you have someone who's elderly, they have medical history, family's there, they're seeing a physician, you can let the body go to a funeral home. But if it's someone who is, found unresponsive on the street and medics show up and pronounce him deceased, there's an investigation that needs to be launched because you don't know what happened to that person.
Yes.
So we collect the information from the police that call it in. We respond to the scene. We take photographs, we interview people, we take measurements if necessary, we collect possible evidence, medications, and then we bring the body back to the medical examiner's office. We put the case together and present it to the pathologist, and they determine what kind of an exam the decedent needs to have.
It's so fascinating. It sounds like such an interesting role. And then there's a crossover with a couple of different roles in the UK. And that's why it's really fascinating to us. So here in the UK, the police would go, or the medics would go, and they would suggest that there needs to be an investigation. And then they'd call in us, the crime scene investigators. So as a crime scene investigator, we would go and attend, we'd take the photographs and we would collect the evidence. And then we would assist in getting that body to the mortuary for the forensic pathologist to then do the post-mortem or autopsy. Do you guys say autopsies, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Get me lingo right. And then we have a coroner's officer who would do things such as liaise with the families, collect medications, potentially collect anti-mortem data. So your role is, it seems like a cross between a crime scene investigators and a coroner's officer. Like you're doing all of that effectively.
Yeah. And in, some jurisdictions here, depending on the area that's served and the population base, the medical legal death investigator would do everything. But like here in the District of Columbia, we have a dedicated Department of Forensic Sciences that deals with evidence, and they do their own investigation, which encompasses more of the scene, where our jurisdiction is only over the body and things that relate to the potential cause of death.
So effectively, the scene investigators are doing the scene and you're doing the body and cause of death.
Yes.
It is really fascinating, isn't it? I think that I would absolutely love your role. I mean, I love being a crime scene investigator, but I think I'd really love your role because for me, one of the most interesting parts of my job was post-mortems or was autopsies and investigating death, whatever that looked like. We always have this conversation about whether you can say you enjoy it or not, but the truth is you used to enjoy it because somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, and I love this job because you never see the same thing twice.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it interesting. And, you never know what you have to do or who you have to look into or what their background is or what their lifestyle was led to how they died. And it's just super fascinating. And a lot of people would say it's morbid, but when you have the ability to tell the family, no, this is exactly what happened, even as grim as it was or as surprising as it is, they at least have an answer that they can process.
So yeah, it's really rewarding, and I guess giving that family closure, because often that unknown is what stops a lot of people from moving through the grief process, isn't it? And being able to move forward.
Yes, definitely.
When you go to the mortuary, are you involved in the postmortems as well?
When I worked out in Washington State, I was. And when I started in Connecticut, the bulk of the job was scene investigation.
Mhm.
And when the caseload was light and I had to be in the office for the day, I would go down to the autopsy room and see autopsies and talk to the doctors on my cases and ask a lot of questions like, why did this person die? What did you find? And I learned a lot that way, even though I wasn't allowed to participate.
Yeah.
When I got out to Snohomish County, the office was pretty small and they had combined their autopsy tech and investigator position. So we rotated in and out of autopsy for 3 months out of the year. So I learned how to do autopsies there and everything that comes along with it, like the toxicology, preparing the histology blocks, doing radiology. And then we used to also have to identify the people. So taking the right radiographs if we had to do a skeletal analysis or assisting with the dental x-rays and fingerprinting.
So the
Wow.
full remit across the forensic disciplines.
Yes.
Sounds so fascinating.
Yeah. I did enjoy doing autopsy, as bad as that does sound, but what you think you standard anatomical diagram for human beings is, and then you look at somebody and you're like, oh my goodness, you have two spleens.
Yeah, how does that happen?
Or
Yeah.
you have all this, medical diagnoses going on that I can see here that's not documented in your medical record. So it's interesting to see how you go to the doctor, you get your checkup, you go for lab testing, and they're like, oh yeah, everything's fine. And then, however long it is later that you pass away, it's like, oh no, everything wasn't fine and they missed all this stuff.
Wasn't so fine after all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is such a fascinating area though, isn't it? Again, it's one of the areas that I used to love, was attending autopsies. So as crime scene investigators, we would go in a couple of different capacities. So we'd either be the crime scene photographer, or we would be a sample taker, or you'd be there as a exhibits officer and note taker. So you'd be taking them into the clean area and taking the notes and writing the exhibits. So it's one of three roles that you can take as a crime scene investigator in the UK. And I always used to really enjoy it, but probably for me, my favorite role was always photographer. I'm not sure why, but I used to enjoy taking the photographs. But we've worked with some amazing forensic pathologists, and they would give you great insight into what was going on in terms of cause and manner of death. And like you say, you think that people have an idea of what's going on inside them, or you open them up and there's two spleens, for instance. And nature's just such an incredible thing, isn't it? Some of the things that you see are just unbelievable, really.
Yeah, humans definitely have quite a bit of variability.
Yeah.
Definitely. You said you started out as a biology teacher, or you were thinking about it, but it wasn't for you, and then you kind of moved into this area of work. Were you ever quite morbid, do you think? Did you have a fascination with it, or was it literally when you just realized that reward of being able to tell somebody how and why their loved one had died?
I was terrified at first.
Were
Uh,
you?
yeah, used
Yeah.
when I when I started off at Yale, there was two ways to get into the office area. One was through the autopsy suites, and the other was through the cooler or the refrigerator. And the first time that I cut through the cooler to get to the office, I was like, oh my God, I'm in a room full of dead people, and there's more dead people in my division than there is human beings that are
Living.
alive.
Yeah.
And it kind of it was, I was scared at first, but I've always, even since I was like a little tiny kid, I always like to put puzzles together. I always like to take things apart and put them back together. In hobbies, like I build stuff, I do my own maintenance on my yard equipment. I come from a long line of people who are very mechanically inclined. So to me, it was just another puzzle and another like project to have that kind of outcome with the families made it easier for me to wrap my head around the fact that this is a dead person here, and get past the morbidity of it. But it's still like, even with my friends and family who've passed away, there's this, you have to kind of dissociate yourself from your line of work, not like dishuman them, but kind of think of them as like, I don't know this person. I have a job to do. My job is very important, and I can't personalize this. Whereas in your, personal life, if anything ever goes on with somebody in my family that's got something medical going on, I'm like, I can't look. I don't want to see,
Yeah.
or whatever, because it's freaky to know that, that a person who's close to you, who you're emotionally connected to, would have something wrong with them.
It's very different, isn't it? It's that level of detachment. You have to kind of be able to detach to be able to do your job. But we always say, don't we, Dee, if you were emotionally attached or put the emotion into it, you wouldn't be able to function enough to do your job.
Yeah. You, like you say, you just have to be able to detach from it entirely, don't you? I think dealing with people who are alive with injuries and things as well are a lot harder to deal with. So we used to have to go and do a lot of injury photography of victims of crime. And when you go along and someone's alive and you can see their injuries, I find that a lot harder to deal with than the person who's deceased, because you can almost feel the pain for them. You can see it and you can see how it's affecting them, and then you can see how it's affecting them emotionally as well. So I find it a lot harder to deal with in those cases.
Yeah, definitely. For a very, very brief period of time, I was a crime scene investigator in Connecticut. It was one of the jobs I took to step into the medical examiner's office. And we used to have to go to the hospital and take pictures of people with injuries. And that was too hard for me. I couldn't do that.
Like crime scene investigation, did you enjoy it, or was it a stepping stone for you?
I didn't particularly enjoy it. The part of the problem was that the office I worked at was very understaffed, and there was one week that I didn't go home for 7 days. We had
Wow.
we had an assault turned murder case, and we had to serve 6 search warrants within the week, and there was just not enough staff to do it. We were all there for a week straight, and it was grueling. And I'm not like a paperwork type person. I want to.
Yeah, fair enough.
Practical and hands-on.
Yeah, and it just wasn't the right fit for me. But when we did have a few cases where we had to investigate a death from the crime scene side, and I really enjoyed those cases more than, somebody robbed a Dunkin' Donuts and they had gloves on and a mask and their surveillance wasn't working, and I have to spend 4 hours fingerprinting this place for absolutely no reason.
When every man and his dog's been in Dunkin' Donuts that day. You're really touching upon the not very glamorous side of scene investigation, the quite laborious side, the challenging side of it at times.
Yeah.
I was like you, Julie, when I first started, I found being around dead bodies a little bit freaky. I was quite morbid from a young age, I have to say, because I saw my first dead body when I was about 6, and I became quite fascinated. So I always wanted to kind of get around them and find out more. So I suppose I always did have that morbid curiosity. But I have to say, when it came to it, in my first autopsy, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck. I was thinking, this is such an unnatural environment. What am I doing here? And they're often here, autopsy rooms are always in the belly of the hospital. They're always quite underground, very dark, quite miserable places to be, full of artificial light and, like you say, cold refrigeration. And they're just not natural places to be, really, are they?
No, they're not. And everyone that I've ever been in here is way different. In Connecticut, it was loading dock, but they had a lot of windows that looked out into the woods outside because they had built the building in this really secluded area. So you'd come into work in the morning and there'd be like a family of turkeys out in the parking lot. And there's like all this wildlife, and it's beautiful. And then you walk into work and it's this ugly brown room. And here in our building, here in the district, the morgue and the autopsy suite are actually on the 5th floor of an office building.
Really?
Oh, wow.
I don't know why I
So
find
we
that quite
have
bizarre.
this yeah, the district wanted to put the forensics laboratories all in one building. So we have the Department of Forensic Sciences is here on the bottom floors, and then they put us on the 5th and 6th floor. So it's pretty interesting to have to transport people up and down on the freight elevator all the time.
Oh, yeah.
It just sounds so bizarre.
That adds a bit of a logistical nightmare if the lifts or anything go off, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they do often. They get a lot of use.
Oh, that's not what you want.
You must see a lot of awful, gruesome things, and probably some of the worst of humanity, I imagine.
Yes, unfortunately.
Can I ask, do you have coping mechanisms for that, seeing it day in, day out? Because it's kind of repeated trauma, isn't it? You're just seeing trauma upon trauma.
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, after a while, you do get desensitized to it.
Yeah.
But the way that I decompress when I get home is I have a couple of cats, and they are
Lovely.
ridiculous and crazy. And I do talk to my husband about my cases, especially the ones that bother me. If I have a particularly hard case, just to vent and get it out. That helps a lot too. And then in my off days, I spend a lot of time outside. Just like nature helps me get my focus back. So I have a garden, and I'm always doing something outside the yard, or doing some projects to fix something around the house. And that in the past, I have used other mechanisms. Like I had a therapist for a while, but I find that unless you can really find a therapist that knows exactly what you do, they're kind of useless.
Yes, we
A
have
lot
found that.
Yeah, a lot of them are trained in like grief therapy for a personal loss, but not repeated exposed work trauma.
Yeah, we've found the same issues, haven't we? And often
have.
what we've said is that you can be talking away in these sessions, and then it looks as though you're traumatizing the therapist.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
like, can I help you here?
Yeah, which is not helpful for yourself at all, is it, when you're found in that situation? Because like you say, you feel like then you're kind of protecting them, so you kind of shut down some of the things you probably would have discussed because you can see they're not coping with what you're telling them.
Yeah, and then you don't know how to help them because you're there for them to help you. So you don't know what to say.
So you tend to decompress, go out in nature, spend time with your cats. Do you have quite a dark sense of humor?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and you have to learn in what kind of company you can bring it out.
When and where.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
We're the same.
but that's also another coping mechanism. There's a lot of emotions that you feel when you have to investigate deaths. And there's also an aspect of burnout to it too. And here in the US, we're in the middle, I guess, of a very large illegal drug problem. And they used to call it the opioid crisis, which is still there, but different areas of the United States have drugs that they're more used to getting or having. Like here on the East Coast, from like DC to New York, people still use a lot of the old drugs like cocaine, crack, PCP. On the West Coast, they're still into like heroin and meth and bath salts and some of the other chemical drugs. And that's a lot of the deaths that we investigate. Is a lot of people do drugs. A lot of people have a drug history. It's becoming generational, unfortunately. And to have those day after day after day gets really taxing. And sometimes you come back from a scene and you're upset or you're mad or you're frustrated because it's the same thing over and over again. And to go to your colleagues and just to be able to vent and swear and talk about the scene and even make some really bad jokes about not necessarily the person who passed away, but something with the apartment building, like, oh my God, I've been there 6 times this month already, and that does tend to help. And, even from the police that we work with too, they will get upset. And sometimes we just call each other just to vent and scream, and it does help.
Yeah, leaning on your colleagues who know what you're going through is really important, isn't it? And like you say, that dark sense of humor, we always say it's never a disrespectful thing. It's definitely never any disrespect to the deceased or what's going on in the case. It is literally a coping mechanism, often to deal with the circumstances. And just sometimes the places you find yourself and the things you find yourself dealing with, because it's not really natural, is it? It's not normal, for want of a better word, but I don't really like the word normal, but it's not really normal, is it? It's not everybody's every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, who has a job where you just like start traipsing around some stranger's house? And you have
going to anybody's house at any given time. Legally, you just walk in, I'm here.
Yeah, and I have the legal authority to go through all your stuff, sorry, but this is the way it is. It's very odd. You're right. It's not normal at all. And, sometimes just to be able to crack a couple jokes to somebody about things that you find, I remember this one case I had in Washington State where it was just this little old lady. She passed away in bed. I think we ended up bringing her in because we couldn't find her family right away, and she was being checked on by her neighbor. But she had this collection of these dolls that she sewed herself with that were very anatomically correct.
Really? That's so weird.
Yeah, and we just, we made a few jokes about, the geriatric population still having a sex drive, and like that's okay.
Yeah.
Like you say, laughter, it helps, and it brings your mood up a little bit, doesn't it, to help you to carry on and do what you need to do.
Yeah, definitely.
That sounds like an interesting one. Did it feel like all the dolls' eyes were kind of watching you and following you around the scene and stuff as well?
Yeah, I think I ended up turning a few of them around because it was a little creepy.
Don't look at me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I have to do this.
Yeah, dolls can be a bit freaky at the best of times, let alone in a crime scene and anatomically correct dolls just staring at you.
Yes.
Brilliant.
We once had a case that Dee and I went to together, actually, talking about dark sense of humor. It was the most bizarre situation. It was really sad because it was an elderly lady who had died in her garden and she had dementia. So she had started using the toilet outside. And she was often very confused, and she'd be found in a garden naked. And we'd been called to the scene to make sure that nothing was suspicious and that there was no investigation required, and to take photographs for the coroner. And we got to the scene and we started checking everything over, and it was natural circumstances. She'd basically gone naked into a garden and gone to use the toilet, which at that point was a tree stump, and then had died and had fallen over in the garden. And it was so sad. We were really aware of her dignity in keeping her covered because the neighbours' gardens all looked over, and we had a new police officer with us who seemed a bit kind of confused and wasn't really sure what to do. And then all of a sudden, we heard this scrambling at the fence, and the neighbour climbed up and popped her head over the fence and then started screaming, "She's been murdered! She's been murdered!" And we were like, "She hasn't!" And then we were like, "Pass the blanket." And this police officer was like, "What?" And we were like, "Cover her up, like give her a dignity." So we were trying to cover the deceased. And then Dion's saying to the police officer, "I think you need to go and talk to that neighbour." But by this point, she'd run outside into the front of the property, and she was running up and down the street in her nightclothes shouting, "There's been a murder! There's been a murder!"
It was so bad, wasn't it?
It was so bad.
Oh my
Can
goodness.
still hear that scrambling noise and see the police officer's face. He's just stood there with a blanket looking up, just staring. And we were like, "Give us the blanket." He just got so confused by the whole situation, wasn't he?
I mean, it was a bit confusing. She came from nowhere. But yeah.
Wow.
It was quite a high fence as well, wasn't it? It's got to have been at least a 6-7 foot fence, and you just heard this scrambling and them just appearing over the top. It was so weird.
And then we came to leave the scene, and she was still running about in her nightclothes, screaming about the murder. And the poor police officers kind of chasing her, about to try and calm her down. And we walked out with our kits, and we were just getting back into the van, and she saw us, and she came heading towards us, and we were like, "Get in the van, like, drive, drive."
That was an interesting one.
Like you say, talking about dark humor, I mean, we laughed about that. I mean, you had to. It was not for the circumstances or the poor lady that had died. That was really sad, but just the whole scenario. And it's just, again, you're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
I imagine you have quite a lot of scenes like that, do you? How did I find myself here, and what's going on?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We, especially Connecticut and Washington State, there's a lot of rural areas. And, we had all kinds of people, like I had a guy who took his Jeep out into the forest, and he got stuck, and he got out to see if he could try to maneuver the car over a tree limb or something, and then he just dropped dead. He was elderly,
Oh,
had
no.
cardiac history, and the stress of the situation just, he collapsed there. So his friend found him, called the authorities, and we all went out there. And I'm out there with 2 other people, and we're looking at this guy who was quite a bit overweight, and we're just like, how are we supposed to get him out of here? Like, we're 2 miles deep into the woods.
Dear. No.
We had, and sometimes you have to get really creative with trying to recover a person. We, out in Washington State, we had a pair of draft horses at our disposal from the sheriff's office that we could use in situations like that. I had a case here recently with a colleague where a person was found skeletonized in a stream bed. So it was
really?
The woods went down. I really can't call it woods. It was kind of like this undeveloped piece of property in between a highway and an apartment complex. And the terrain just went steep down into this ravine where there was a small stream, and that's where the deceased was. And again, it's like, okay, how are we going to get him out of here? We spent 2 hours doing a grid search for all of his bones. And then, I ended up just putting him in a body bag and strapping it to my back and hiking it back up the hill. because otherwise
Really? Wow.
somebody out of there.
Wow.
Yeah, I think like regarding TV and crime shows and stuff, everybody always dies in a pristine environment.
Yeah.
You have a poor naked elderly woman out in the garden, or somebody out in the woods, or even someone in a hoarding environment. You have to have a plan and a wherewithal to try to extricate the person from that situation too, in a dignified manner, and then remove them from the scene. So you absolutely never know what you're walking into when you get somewhere.
That's it. And it's always about dignity and respect first, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I remember I attended a scene with a woman who was a hoarder, and we could barely get to her. She died of natural causes in the end, but she died and fallen off the bed, so she was half under the bed, half out of the bed, but everything else around her was piled high with just newspapers, rubbish, you name it. And we're trying to get through, but it took us so long to even work our way through to get to her to try and figure out what had happened. And there was mice everywhere and rats everywhere. And oh yeah, that was a difficult scene. Like you
Lovely.
said, on the TV, it always looks so pristine and so easy. And sometimes you really got to think outside the box, haven't you?
You do. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I think you get a shock realizing how many people live in those situations as well. So, like you mentioned, the hoarders, the amount of scenes I've been to where it's been in a hoarding environment is just unbelievable. I don't think people think about that side of the job either, do they?
Not at all. And hoarding seems to be becoming more and more prevalent. And
Really?
at least here, I started my career, I think I've been doing it 21 years ago, and a hoarder scene was really rare. I remember I had one lady who she was elderly, passed away at home in bed, um, but she didn't really she hoarded her empty alcohol bottles, and also she had no running water in the house, so she was going to the bathroom in trash bags and tying them up and storing them in
Oh,
half of
wow.
her house. So getting her out of there without disturbing that was difficult.
Difficult.
Yeah, and that case always stuck with me because I had never seen hoarding before, but within the past few years here, and I'm not sure if like COVID had anything to do with it because people are more isolated, but we have at least 2 really bad hoarding scenes a week here in
A
DC.
week?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that is a
That is a
lot.
lot. They
Yeah.
said in unison. We're shocked.
And it seems to be getting worse. And not only is it's difficult on a lot of levels because you have all of that stuff that you have to deal with in the house or apartment. It's also a hazard because you don't know what kind of a condition the house is in. You don't know what's there, mice, rats. I mean, Gene Hackman's wife passed away from hantavirus, which it's from what I learned is prevalent west of the Mississippi River here in the United States, but who knows if we don't know if it's everywhere because and they also, right, mice and rats also carry a lot of other pathogens. We have a lot of, DC is very humid, so we have cockroaches and bed bugs and everything else. So those types of scenes are dangerous on a lot of levels as well.
Definitely health and safety is a big thing, isn't it? Do you deal much with the families?
Every day.
Every day?
Every day.
How do you find that?
It's difficult. It took me a really long time to learn how to talk to families and to explain to them what I need from them and to explain it in a way that doesn't pass any judgment.
Yeah.
Because we're not here to judge or make any comments about a person's lifestyle. We just want to know exactly what happened. And there's families that don't want to hear it. There's families that will be completely honest. And there's families that will keep in contact for months at a time, even after everything is finalized, because they don't have a way to, they haven't come to terms with what happened because they didn't think their loved one was doing what they did. One of the things that I do here in DC is have a backlog of unidentified people, and we're trying to get a lot of our specimens tested for DNA so that we can upload them into NamUs and see if we can try to match up some people and get some people identified. We also have a side of NamUs is unclaimed people, and people who have absolutely no family will put in there, because DC is a really transient society. There's not a lot of people who actually live here. But people will move here for their jobs. We have a large homeless population, and sometimes we can get somebody identified, but we don't know anything else about them if they don't have any kind of an electronic footprint. So NamUs has been honestly a godsend to help us with those cases as a whole. And sometimes we'll have families that learn about NamUs and they're looking for a relative who was homeless and they lost contact with them, and they'll find them in the system. So we'll speak to families about new cases, about cases that are old. We recently identified a woman who died in 1991, and
Wow.
I've been dealing with her family since October, because cases that old, there's the case file isn't digitized, so it's hard to look up. Some of the information is missing, and then it's a problem of, where did she go? Because, she, back then, what they did was cremate people who they thought that they had collected all the evidence they needed for, and this was prior to DNA becoming a thing. So they would, cremate the person, and then I had to track down where she was. But yeah, I've been talking to her brother now for 7 months about her case. But and yeah, families it's rewarding. It can be frustrating, and it can be tiring at the same time.
I can imagine. The reason that I asked is because it's one of the things that I always found difficult. So as a scene investigator, I always found it easier to deal with dead bodies or the crime scene. That made it easier for me to detach. But when the families became involved for whatever reason, and all of a sudden that emotional link was there and that emotional tie, I often found that much harder, particularly when you see the trauma that they're going through and the hurt and the upset that they're going through. And Dee and I are also disaster response consultants, and we work on air disasters. And we've done things like some family liaison work, and we've taken personal effects back to families of the deceased from the disaster. And that is really rewarding. But again, I find much harder than dealing with the death itself, dealing with the scene.
I think it's definitely the hardest part of the job.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, what does NamUs stand for?
That's what I was going to ask as well.
Where brilliant minds.
It stands for name us, like, give you a name.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, I think I might be wrong on this, but back in the day, I think the website used to be called findthemissing.org. And it was a way for law enforcement, medical examiners, and families to use a centralized website for missing people versus unidentified people. What we do here at the medical examiner's office is, if we have anyone who's unidentified, but we have a biological profile on them, we put them up in there. You can pull up a link to connect it to the missing people side of things to see if you might have any matches. And the law enforcement also has access to it for some of their older cold cases as well. So the case that we had in October, we identified this woman through NamUs, actually. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details of her case, but in 1991, she was found deceased in a garage, and they did an autopsy on her. Everything was negative. They couldn't really, I think her cause of death was undetermined, but they didn't have an identity on her. They ran her fingerprints and they took some x-rays and dentals, but they had nothing to compare it to, and her fingerprints were negative. So one of the projects that I'm working on with our police department is to try to consolidate some of these cases. So we came up with a list and she was on it. So I grabbed her case file, I started putting her into NamUs, and I crossed it with the missing persons list and found a person from South Carolina that was a potential match. And so NamUs is free, which is amazing for us because being in government, we're the last person that gets funded within the entire organization because nobody think about the House of the Dead.
It's often the way, isn't it? Sadly.
Mm-hmm. And it's also families can look on NamUs if they're looking for someone. They can see part of the profiles that we put in, and then look at photographs and see if their loved one is potentially in some other area of the United States that they weren't looking for.
Sounds like a fantastic resource.
It is.
It really does. Sounds brilliant. I think people are often shocked when we do get unidentified bodies, when we get fingerprints and DNA from them, that doesn't automatically give us an identification, because people don't think about the fact that actually, unless they've been recorded in some way on over here, if it's not on the police systems, then we've got no way of identifying them if we don't know who they are at all. I think people just think, oh, well, if you get the fingerprints and you've got the DNA, then you get an identification for these people.
But you have to have something to compare it to. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
That's what we often say in our lecturing, isn't it? That forensic science, it's a comparative science. You can collect as much evidence from a scene as you want, but if you've got nothing to compare it to, then it's not going to go anywhere. Have you seen a lot of changes, Julie, regarding the treatment of unidentified remains over the years?
Yes.
Are they more? Yes.
Yes. I think back in the day, they kind of got forgotten about. Like in each jurisdiction in the U.S. is different in how they handle unidentified remains. Some places will bury the remains in case they need to exhume them later on to take more evidence as science progresses. Some of them, they get stuck in a banker's box. They'll deflesh the skeleton, save the skeleton, it goes on the shelf, and then if you can afford to run DNA, then maybe you'll pull it out and do it. Sometimes sometimes too, like you were saying, Dion, you might not even be able to get a DNA profile off some of these older remains too, and that's the sad thing, because then you're one step farther from the answer. But I think it depends on who is running the anthropology side of things, because it usually falls under an anthropologist to try to determine or get the proper testing done. And if you have somebody who's really gung-ho and interested in it, then it's going to get more attention than somebody who just wants to focus on the cases of the day and the other present day things that are going on.
Do you think that they're given more priority nowadays?
I think
than they were. Yeah.
Because of TV, I think.
Okay.
Like a lot of these CSI shows and detective shows and things, they just bring a lot of attention towards unidentified people, and maybe that kind of thing is good in a way, because then some families are like, oh yeah, do you ever remember whatever happened to Uncle Harry? Because I haven't seen him in 20 years. And then maybe they'll make a missing persons report and provide a DNA sample, and then somebody can maybe find him out there somewhere.
So there's some positive effects of the TV shows. Have you encountered any negative effects of the TV shows?
Oh yeah, just like Dion was saying, with fingerprints. He's like, oh, you have his fingerprints. Why can't you tell me who he is? It's like, it's because we don't upload them into the computer. The computer makes beep beep noises and then you're all done. It just doesn't work like that.
It does not work like that, does it? They certainly raised expectations, I think.
Yes,
It shows.
especially with a case that, we have to call pending from the start. It takes a while sometimes for all the lab testing to come back so we can make a determination. And families here, mostly in the United States, you can get the lab stuff back and make a determination within 90 days. And families are like, I have to wait that long? And it's like, no, hold on. We're not doing anything to hold up any funeral arrangements you want, but, we are at the mercy of the labs and how long it takes them. So it's not like you can plug everything in and in 45 minutes have an answer. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But that's what CSI Miami does. Tells you who it is, exactly where they live, all of their biological information, exactly when they died, exactly where to find them. You have been doing this for a really long time. Is there any one particular case that stands out for you? Is the one that's really stuck with you or had significant impact?
A lot of them have, but I think the ones for me are the big disasters that I've had to respond to. I had a power plant explode in Connecticut in 2010, and there were 6 people who passed away because of that. When I was out in Washington State in 2014, we had the Oso mudslide, and a mountain fell down and wiped out 2 subdivisions. And we worked with search and rescue, and we had to dig up an entire square mile of a mud debris field. We had 43 people pass away in that. And
oh my goodness, that must have been tough scene in every aspect.
Yeah, that was a lot. And then we just had the American Airlines plane crash here in DC in January.
Of course, I was going to say that was so recent, wasn't it?
Yeah. And there's other cases that stand out to me. There's a few suicides that stuck with me over the years. I had one case all the way back in Connecticut, and this kid still haunts me to this day because I don't think that the doctor ruled his cause of death correctly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a really bizarre situation. I think he was 18 years old. He had just gotten released from jail, and he didn't have anywhere to go, so he went to his cousin's house, and there was like 8 people living in this apartment, and he got a hold of a revolver somehow. I don't know. I don't think we ever found out if it was his or if it was a family member's, but he said to a family member that he was playing with it, and he took all of the cartridges out of the cylinder, and then he put the cylinder back, and he was rolling it and playing like a Russian roulette game with himself.
Okay. And
he shot himself in the head, so that's what they told me. And when I got to the scene, crime scene had already moved the gun and moved the decedent and did some other stuff before I got there, so I couldn't exactly see where he was. But when they described his positioning, where the gun was, that the cartridges were still in his coat pocket, and the spatter on the wall, I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. Mm-hmm. Couldn't find the cartridges. And I don't remember how many, I took so many photos of that scene and tried to get down on the level of the decedent and try to point the camera up to the spatter to see how it didn't make any sense. And I explained all that to the pathologist multiple times, that I didn't think that it was a suicide. I didn't think he accidentally shot himself in the head. I think that somebody else did it to him. And he just said, well, the cops said it was a suicide, so that's how I'm going to rule it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I still see that kid every once in a while. Like, he'll pop up in my dreams, and I really don't think his death was ruled properly, but I felt like I tried to explain the situation properly, and I have a gut feeling on top of everything else.
You did everything you could to push it.
Yeah.
That must have been really hard.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised he still comes back up for you, because, yeah, how do you let go of something like that when you're so sure it's the wrong call?
Yeah. And you don't have anybody else to talk to about it or anything else to investigate. Like I talked to the police, talked to the doctor, I talked to my chief, and that was the end of it.
So the crime scene technicians had moved things before you'd actually got to the scene.
Yes.
Had they photographed prior to moving things?
He didn't actually.
Wow.
Yeah. We had some issues with him before. I think he ended up getting let go from that department. But yeah, he kind of messed up the scene from the start, unfortunately.
That is such a shame. And the problem is with that is you can't go back, can you? Like, once a scene's been contaminated or evidence been interrupted, once it's lost, it's lost. There's nowhere to go from there.
No, you can only do so much reconstruction, but you never really actually know before then. And this was back before body cameras and people with the Nest cameras in their houses and everything like that. So we had nothing.
Are you finding that body-worn cameras and the Nest cameras are quite useful and helpful to you?
Yes.
That's good.
Yes, very much so. Here in the district, we have a great working relationship with our police department, the officers, the detectives, and they know that they can't do anything with the decedent before we get there. So we kind of end up getting there at the same time, or we'll enter at the same time so that we know that nothing's moved. And if there ever is a question, we are able to request the body cam video. And there are families will willingly give up their video in the house as well. Like we have investigated some claims of elder abuse where families have put up cameras in the bedrooms of where the person is, and they'll give us even past footage of some things that have happened to that person for the doctor to be able to view, and it's a big help.
We have body worn here now in the UK with our officers, and it's interesting because sometimes it shows them contaminating the crime scene and it doesn't do them any favours at all.
Yeah.
That's why I was thinking,
still, and you can see what's actually gone on at least, isn't it?
well, yeah, and I suppose it helps identify training gaps as well when people are going in and moving things around. And one of our colleagues was telling us at a recent murder scene, there was about 7 officers ran into a small flat and they were all around the body and then like rolling the body over, patting it down, looking for weapons or drugs. And then one of them is just in the mirror, checking himself out in the living room mirror. It's like, you know, you've got a camera on, like, come on.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Yeah, and sometimes people forget the cameras are on and they'll say some unsavory things, and so like, hey, remember your camera's on here. You might want to cool it on that talk right now.
Yeah.
Let's not forget disclosure.
I think the difference between the UK and the US is really interesting. The way it sounds like you guys have more investigators overall on a scene, and it sounds like you might be able to actually like get more stuff done because each person has more of a smaller role to play, instead of one person trying to manage everything and the potential to forget something or to not photograph something or collect medications or do something that would really make or break the case. So you guys have a coroner system there?
We do, yes. We will often, as crime scene investigators, for instance, in a murder scene, we would work in a team of 3, minimum 2, but we'd have a crime scene manager and a crime scene investigator. We would be the main ones working on that scene unless we needed other experts. So we'd potentially call down the forensic pathologist who'd come and examine the body in situ, so they would be able to see before the body got to autopsy. So they already knew the circumstances, they knew what had happened in the scene, and they basically were prepared to go into autopsy. The coroner's officer doesn't usually come into the crime scene whilst it's live, but they can later request to go down to the crime scene if they want, and they are welcome. And they might look for things like medications and stuff, but often that's done by ourselves and also senior investigating officers, the police investigation team. And then the coroner's office does a lot with the family and a lot of putting the case file together for the coroner, who will then open the inquest. So it is quite a big investigation team where we all do play our own roles and small parts in it.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Whereas it sounds like you're fully responsible for the full investigation of the death, and then you've got the crime scene investigators who are responsible for the processing of the scene itself.
Yes. Just comparing, it sounds like I do 3 people's jobs for what you guys do.
Yeah. That's what I
That's-
thought when you were describing it.
Yeah.
That's a lot on one person's shoulders, isn't it?
Yeah. You get used to it. You know what you need to do. I don't know how, if I got put into your roles, like, I don't know how I'd be able to separate because I've been doing this for so long. And also, like, I have a great team of 15 people here who are investigators, and we do a lot of training. We do continued training, and it just works really well. I'm just trying to think about how, if we had to split all that up here, like, how would we do it?
You must work quite closely with the crime scene investigators, though, I imagine.
Yeah, we do. They don't come out to every scene. They respond to everything that happens outside, every homicide scene, and anything that's, like, technically suspicious. So if we, they have a little old lady who passes away in bed and we can't get a hold of their family, then they don't necessarily come out for that, because to us, it's not a crime scene because a crime hasn't occurred.
Yeah.
But if we do find something, like, later on, the police can get a search warrant to go back in, and if it's gonna go to court for some reason, the court system always subpoenas our photographs and our records. So it kind of overlaps like that if it needs to be.
It's interesting because in the UK now, the crime scene investigators are not going out to everything either. So when we were in force, we would go to everything suspicious and non-suspicious, and it would be up to us to investigate and deem whether something was suspicious or non-suspicious. But we'd also take photographs for the coroner. So we'd go to a lot of suicides, for instance. And now a lot of crime scene investigators are not going to those scenes. And it started to be deemed suitable that the body-worn evidence is enough for the coroner. And I find that really interesting because we know of a few cases where information's been missed, or there's been cases where it's been declared as non-suspicious, and then the funeral directors turned up and rolled the body over, and somebody's had a knife in the back, and actually all of a sudden it's suspicious. And there's been a few cases where things have been missed, and it's just because people are not trained to look. And I guess that doesn't happen very often, but there is the possibility of that happening. So I always find it bizarre now that the crime scene investigators are not going to these incidents. But for me as well, it also means that the scene investigators, they're not getting as much kind of breadth and knowledge. They're not seeing dead bodies as much. So it means that when they do get them, it's really quite shocking. Whereas we went to anything and everything, didn't we? And so you'd see it, and it just became part of your norm. And like you say, you desensitize a little bit. But I think that there's some skill and experience being lost somewhere there. And I think that it also has the potential to maybe be problematic at some point.
Yeah, it sounds like it. My thinking is that even if I have a little old lady dead in bed, I'm going to treat her as a homicide or a murder until the scene and her body prove me otherwise. So to not thoroughly investigate and just kind of walk around with a camera looking at stuff too, you know, I mean, like how many times have you heard a story about some normal, seemingly normal, just dead guy in a house, and then you go to look at all his medications and they were all, 7 of them were prescribed last month and they're empty, you know, and
Exactly.
I mean, now you have to think about a suicide, but if you're just walking around with a camera, you're not, you know, and you don't know to look in medications or turn the body over even, you know, you're going to miss something big.
Exactly. And I suppose that'd be the difference actually where you come in and a gap that we're missing, because all we have is the police officer going down with the body worn, doing basic checks and saying this is non-suspicious, and then calling funeral directors. If we had medico-legal death investigators, you'd have somebody going out to all of those scenes that would pick that up. And I don't know why our system changed to stop us from going to so many of those. I think it's probably a lack of funding, a lack of resources, possibly because I think it's easy to become quite complacent when you go to suicide after suicide after suicide, and it is, and you think, okay, so a police officer could have done that and we could have took the body worn. You know, I think it's a whole mix of potential reasons, but I do also think a potentially dangerous one. So yeah, I find it really fascinating how it works in the States. I actually want to come and work with you now.
Yeah, it does sound
I
fascinating.
I know, I'd like to come and visit you guys and see how it works over there too. Yeah, once things settle down here, maybe a little bit, the current political climate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a whole different podcast, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Stay safe and stay well. Actually,
Yeah.
get out. Come now.
No.
I think that's probably a good place for us to round up. Thank you so much, Julie, for coming along and giving us an insight into your role, your experience, and how things are done over in the US in comparison over here. It's been really interesting for us to hear. I'm sure our listeners will find that really interesting as well. So thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you very much for having me.
I think we could have talked for hours, to be fair.
Yeah, I do as well. Well, thank you to you again, and thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in as well. Hopefully, you've all found it as interesting as myself and Ange. And we will see you in a fortnight's time for another episode of the Crime Scene Insiders, where we will take you back under the barrier tape.